Hi, and welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. This is Dr. Sadaf Lodhi, and I would love for you to leave me a review of this podcast and also to share and like it and share it with your friends, see what they think, and let me know. I would love to shout you out on social media. And also, I would love for you to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Sadaf OBGYN, as well as TikTok. I also have started a YouTube channel at Dr. Sadaf Intimacy Coach. I'd love for you to follow me on all of those channels. And most importantly, I'd love for you to become a patient. I am now accepting telehealth patients for sexual health as well as menopause health in New York and Michigan. So if you are a woman that is looking for a doctor that understands you and can actually take the time to listen to all of your concerns, reach out to me. Reach out at Dr. Sadaf at drsadaf.com. And I would love to see you as a patient. And now for the episode. I'm an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf Lodhi, and this episode is everything you need to know about female sexuality in Pakistan. And before I get into it, I want to make a few things very clear. One is that I'm not giving any type of medical advice. So if you're having any questions about your health, please speak with your healthcare provider. And I'm definitely not giving any type of religious advice. If you have any questions about your religion, please speak with your friendly neighborhood religious leader. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that talks about sex. So I am super excited to have on with me today Dr. Sakina Jangbar. And Dr. Jangbar, I am going to let you introduce yourself to the viewers in the audience that may not know you.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I am Sakina Jangbar. I am a professor at St. John's University in New York City. My PhD is in communication studies with an emphasis on rhetoric and language, and that's also what I teach at the university. Most of my research is on Muslim feminism, especially in Pakistan. And I know you found me recently because I published a paper on some condom ads that were initially banned and then reinstated for late night programming.
Yes.
And so thank you for inviting me.
Yes, no, thank you. And thank you for your time. I know you're on break, so I really appreciate your time. So I definitely want to get into the heart of the matter because I'm so curious. And yes, I found so what happened is that I am on social media. And for those that don't know, my Instagram and TikTok handle are at Dr. Sadaf OBGYN. And there was another person that I follow, Habiba Kande. I don't know if you know who he is. Yep. Okay. So he had posted the article because I think you had quoted him, or at least his book. I believe it was Women of Desire and A Taste of Honey, both of them. A Women of Desire is a smaller version of A Taste of Honey. And so, anyways, you had, I think, quoted some excerpts from his book. And so he had posted that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. Let me see what this is all about. So please tell us all about what you did, your research, and what made you get into this.
Wow, what made me get into this?
Yes, we're all excited and so curious to know.
Well, so the story starts when I first came to the United States 30 years ago. I was just a young girl, 19 years old, and I was a rebel in Karachi where I grew up. But then when I came here, I just found there wasn't really a place for me in white feminism. And I didn't understand all of this until I went to grad school. I just thought I wasn't a feminist because I didn't seem to have the same goals and strategies as white women. And I didn't really understand until I went to grad school and I realized that, oh, I am a feminist, but it's just that my faith and my background sort of leads me in different directions. And that's when I started thinking that I need to write more about this topic. And I've been exploring the subject of Muslim women's agency and our feminism through many research articles. Some of my best known work is on Benazir Bhutto. I wrote about her as a willful woman. And, to create this counter archive, the media has created this archive of Muslim women as oppressed by our faith and by our religion. So I'm creating a counter archive of that. Yeah, we are oppressed, but that's not the full story. We're also like fighting for our rights.
Oh, so
And
interesting.
now I was going to mention another paper that has gotten some attention is, if you remember, at the 2016 Democratic National Convention, there was a Pakistani couple on stage. And the woman, Ghazala Khan, was silent, whereas her husband was like flashing the Constitution at Donald Trump and asking him if he's even read it. And she was silent. And the news coverage was that she's oppressed. And I was curious about her silence. So in my research paper, I did an interpretation of her silence and her dupatta, her scarf. And, silent agency is not always expressed in words and by showing skin. And that's where my piece of Muslim feminism comes in, that agency can also be expressed in silence and by wearing a scarf.
That's great. So, I would counter that. I'm sure people, will say to you that Muslim women are not oppressed, and that a lot of times it's the interpretation of the religion and the culture that interprets that religion that oppresses the women, as opposed to the religion itself. What would you counter to that?
Oh, I would agree with that. I think that there is a lot of rereading of scripture from a feminist lens. So people are actually going back to the scripture and reading it for themselves rather than taking the androcentric patriarchal readings that we have received. And we realize that culturally there are practices which are not necessarily in the faith. And
Right.
those practices have resulted in women's oppression. But regardless, that's not the full story. Is our
Absolutely.
There are injustices, yes, but that's not the full story. I think the media wants to show that that's the whole story. And I'm saying, wait, there are some nuances. There are women fighting back and taking extreme risks to have so that women can have more rights
Yeah,
in their
absolutely.
culture. Mhm.
Yeah, I like that. So, I would agree with you because I think that, oftentimes, at least what I have seen, and I'm not a scholar in, feminism by any means, but I would say that oftentimes I see the interpretation of the scriptures or the way that it's implemented, right? And or the way that it's practiced rather. And I think that people take that to mean that Muslim women are oppressed or that we don't have a voice. And I would say that that's not the case. And it's not, most times, it is not the women. Sorry, it's not the religion, but it is the culture that really,
Uh-huh.
interprets the religion to serve their own needs. And, the culture is the one that, and I think that oftentimes we don't, we may know that, and sometimes even people that are Pakistani or of other descent do not realize that it's a culture and that there's a distinction between the culture and the religion and what the religion is saying and what the culture is saying. And I think that you really have to make that distinction when you see something or when you see perhaps some oppression or whatever, women's voices being stifled, that it's really not Islam, but it's really the culture. And so I really want our viewers to take that away because I think that that is a very important distinction.
I was going to say that cultural practices vary.
Yes.
And that's why it's important to have that nuanced view that Islam is not a monolithic religion, that Islam is practiced differently in different communities. And so there is like this flattening that sometimes takes place in how Muslim women are represented in the media, as if we all have the same beliefs or the same practices, but in fact, that there are many nuances. And in my field, especially, there's hardly any literature on Pakistani women.
Mm.
If there is something on Muslim women, a lot has been written on Middle Eastern women, But
Mhm.
like our culture is very different from the Middle East. We are South Asian, our history and our laws are different.
Right.
And Pakistan is the second most populous Muslim nation.
Right.
So that's like a big thing that people don't know, how we actually practice feminism in our country, that our country is more like a faith based feminism where women are reinterpreting scripture and they're asking for the rights that are given to them, guaranteed. It's not like a Congress met and said, oh, now you have this right. Like these rights were guaranteed by God.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
women are rereading that and claiming those rights for themselves. And so they're finding empowerment through faith, not necessarily secular empowerment.
That's fantastic. I love that. So
Mhm.
now definitely let's get into what the big controversy was because I am so curious. So I went ahead and I looked up some of those ads and I was like, what the heck are they doing? It was confusing. And I think for a country like Pakistan, just to kind of, I don't know. So why don't you go ahead? Why don't you explain the ads? Because the viewers are probably like, what the heck is she talking about? What ads?
Yeah. So um, there was the ad campaign by Josh, not Josh, sorry,
Josh?
Josh.
Yeah.
Josh means passion in Urdu. And there was an ad campaign in which they used the supermodel Mathira to show that women will ask for sex if if you remove the unwanted consequences of by using condoms, if you prevent unwanted pregnancy and STDs, then they'll have more of a zest for sex and they'll ask for it. And
Mhm.
in the ads, we see, in some of the ads that I analyzed, that there's a couple that they're moving and they're unpacking boxes. And when the woman expresses that she's tired, the guy's looking for the teapot to make some tea for his wife. And instead, she hints that she has something else in mind, something a little cooling. And then you have like a menthol condom packet being flashed on the screen. So these are the kind of ads. And then I was like, okay, so the when the campaign was aired, people complained about it, and they said that the ads were indecent and against religious values and cultural values. And the Media Regulation Authority, it's PEMRA. I'm not really sure what it stands for. PEMRA. They banned the ads and they said they'd received complaints and these violates some of the norms of our culture and they pulled them off the air. But then they realized that there is a national mandate for birth control. So they said, okay, we'll reinstate the ads, but they'll be for late night programming. So then I got curious as to what was indecent. Like when I watched the ads, they're a little bit cringy.
They're
but
so cringy. I was like, "What? What the heck? That makes
it
no sense."
yeah. So but I I couldn't I was trying to find like what is indecent about it,
Mhm.
right? So like the analysis part of it, the researcher in me, and in our culture we value women being covered, modesty, and all of the women in the ads were either wearing traditional shalwar kameez and dupatta, or even if they're wearing Western clothing, they're fully covered. So, okay, so they're not dressed indecent. And then they're not showing people in nightclubs or any sort of activity that the conservative people would frown on. They're showing married heterosexual couples, frequently with children, or doing domestic activities. So, okay, so then it meets the requirement of decency of attire, it meets sex within marriage criteria. Then what is indecent about it that people are complaining? And the themes that emerged in my analysis is that they present a view of Muslim women or Pakistani Muslim women in which women are demanding sex for pleasure rather than submitting to their husband's needs, like pleasure versus duty. And I think that doesn't sit very well with people because, in Pakistan, we sort of value women. The most value a woman has is when she's a mother.
Yeah.
And so the maternal aspect is always emphasized in birth control campaigns. If you remember the previous campaign in which they said, "Bache do hi acche," like two
Mm,
kids are best.
mm.
And those ads are not banned. Those ran and ran and ran. Like we grew up listening to those ads. So when women take control of their pleasure and femininity is being redefined, not just for maternal reasons, but also as in women want pleasure or they can demand it, they can take charge of it, they can enjoy it. Those were the things that don't sit well with some people, and they saw that as indecent.
Mm, mhm.
So that made me curious. And then the three themes that emerged from it was not only sexual pleasure, but sexual agency. That women are asking for it and they're enjoying it and not just submitting to it because it makes their husbands happy or because it's a way to make babies.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that too. I mean, definitely the commercials were very cringy, but, um, I was rather, I guess even I was a little bit surprised that in those commercials, they were really advocating for the woman to take over and really advocate for her own pleasure. Or there's that one commercial of that same condom company that they show a woman calling a repairman. Was so weird.
I have not seen that one.
Yes, it's like that. So it's like the same company, same condom company, and she keeps calling the repairman like every day. You know, he's coming, he's fixing it. But they don't show you what he's fixing. And then at the end of the commercial, of course, when they flash those condoms, they show you the bed, and that the bed has been broken. I was like, oh my god. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that they were definitely cringy, but, but on the other hand, it's really interesting because I've never when I think of, I guess I would just say based on what I know, just growing up and things like that is, Pakistani women, and I'm a Pakistani woman, and that, first and foremost, right? Nobody ever talks about sex. Nobody ever talks about sex. You don't talk about sex. It's considered shameful, embarrassing, wrong. If you talk about it, it's more, within the context of your own husband, relationship. You definitely not out in the open. So for them to come up with like a commercial, and definitely, I mean, whoever, I've never, even in the American culture, to be honest, right? They don't really prioritize pleasure. I mean, only recently I feel like people are talking more about pleasure, but a lot of times when we talk about sex or sex education here in the school systems, a lot of times it's about abstinence. It's pathologizing sex, such as, like, don't get an STD, don't become pregnant if you don't want to be pregnant, and, beware of intimate partner violence. And all of those things are very, very important. And really, the WHO takes a big initiative in it. And only recently, I think it was in 2019, is when the WHO incorporated into their definition of what is important for sex education, did they incorporate the word pleasure? And that's very recent, right? And so I think that what we see in our Islamic tradition is that pleasure was always prioritized, right? When we read those books on what Habiba Kande has that book, and I'm sure there are several other books that talk about Islam and erotology. They talk about how the Prophet, peace be upon him, prioritized women's pleasure, and how really it's, women have sexual rights, and for women, they can even divorce if they are sexually unsatisfied in their marital relationship, which is mind blowing if you think about it, because that was what, like 1400 years ago that came about. So, women were given all this sexual agency. And then, right, we see that as, and I think a lot of these authors write this in their book, is that, when we have colonialism, then our sex positivity goes away, and we start to incorporate those puritanical values of, sex is wrong, it's dirty, it's shameful, you don't talk about it. And so then we become like that, and then all of a sudden, women start to lose their sexual agency. And so I think it's really important for us to understand our own history and see where we get our beliefs regarding sex, and whether or not those are passed down to us, or whether those are something that, we think about ourselves. And then to see how, in Pakistan, how they view, and of course, like you say, right, Pakistan is not a monolith. Muslim women are not monoliths. So not everyone feels like this, but the backlash that that company received in regard to its commercials about female pleasure and agency really, I think, reflects the attitude of the majority of the population in Pakistan. What would you say?
Yeah. No, when I came across the book by Habiba Kande and I realized, and I think I somehow always knew that, but it's just like you said, it's so shameful and no one will talk about it. And we're not educated in that way. So when I came across that book, I was like, oh yeah, you know what? Like it made sense that sexuality is such an important part of being a human,
Of course, yeah.
that your spirituality, your beliefs, all of that, your soul is connected to that. It's not like this thing that you do and it's separate from what you are as a human. All of your humanness is encompassed, and then sexuality is part of that. So I was really happy to read all of that in Habiba Kande's book, and I was just thinking how far our culture has come from some of those traditional Islamic teachings. The emphasis on pleasure at that time period was radical, and that somehow we've lost that, and we've become prudish. Like we don't want to talk about sex or even basic education. When I went to school, there was never even a full diagram of the body so that we could
Mhm.
understand the parts of our body.
Sure.
I remember I was in college when a friend of mine had a sister who went to medical school. And then she came and she was whispered in my ear one time in class that she said, "Do you know we have two separate holes, one for pee and one for blood?" And my mouth fell open. I was like, "What?" Like even like basic education like that we don't have. And and the reason for that is I think when they want a woman to be innocent, they don't only mean virginity or lack of experience. They also want you to be innocent in any carnal knowledge, any type of knowledge. It goes together because the culture has this view that if a woman has knowledge of these things, then it must be that she is not pure. She's not a good woman because she has all of this knowledge. And then where did she get it from? It's not considered medical knowledge, or it's not considered education. Knowledge in itself is seen as suspicious. So that innocence is hard. Like when you get married, you're not supposed to know anything. And like this is not in my research paper, but these are just some thoughts I have, that it's not the how women are not given access to knowledge is not accidental. I think it's by design, because what does knowledge do, Sadaf? It empowers women.
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
Because if you
Hmm.
know something, then you know when it's not right, or you know when it's wrong, or doesn't feel good, or if someone tries to manipulate you, your knowledge tells you that this is not right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you don't have it, then you're at the mercy of your husband tells you something, and then you have to take that as true because there's
Yeah.
no other way for you to know anything.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I hope it's okay to talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Please do.
this is when I was really young. And there was a long gap after I did my 10th grade and matriculation. And before college starts, there's almost like a year before your results come out. And there was a lady in the neighborhood with whom I used to take some tuition when I was younger. And she had started a school. And she asked me if I would like to teach in her school. And I was just 16 at that time. And I said, okay, why not? I'll make some money. And there were a lot of older ladies there. I was really young. There were women who were married with children. And this one lady, she told me that you have to perform oral sex. Her husband told her that that's the only way she can have a baby. And
Wow.
she really believed that to be true. And I didn't think so, even though I didn't really know, but it didn't seem right. But she totally believed that. And I was like, okay, now looking back, like that story has stuck in my mind, even though it was like 35 years ago, that this is how you manipulate women. Because if we don't have information, then we become subject to whatever information is being fed to us. Because
Yeah,
education equals empowerment. Which I'm
absolutely.
not saying I have anything against oral sex, like, but do it
Oh, no.
if you want to, not because you feel like this, I must, if I want to have a baby. Like that's manipulation and that's not okay.
Yeah, no, I am. There's so many parts of that story that I'm actually very offended. I'm really upset and I'm trying to hold back. Um, no, I absolutely. There's so many things that you stated that, are just upsetting. But so first and foremost, I actually do want to clarify just for the viewers and the listeners out there that actually women have three holes and that, we have a urethra where we pee from and a vagina that a baby comes out of, and also where the blood comes out of through the uterus when we're menstruating, and of course the rectum where we poop from. So definitely there are three holes that women have, and I will tell you that I have patients that are women that have had children and things like that that come to me that are shocked when I tell them they have three holes. And same thing, they thought that where they were peeing from was the same hole that their baby was coming out of and things like that. And this is not specific to any type of ethnicity or race. These are like women in general. So it's really unfortunate, and it really tells you that we are lacking in terms of just our basic anatomy and teaching women about their own bodies. I mean, I think that's first and foremost, right? Is to learn about your own body. And really, I mean, knowledge is power, right? And we hear that all the time. Knowledge is power. And I think that, one of my big motivations of starting up my own social media and this podcast and this and that is to empower women about their own bodies and empower and educate. And I think that that is so, so important. And that the stories that you talk about and you just mentioned really are a case in point to this, right? I mean, think about it. A man, right, telling his wife that the only way she can have a child is to perform oral sex on him. That is really, really upsetting, right? I mean, there's so many things wrong in that statement in and of itself, but it just shows you the power, right? The power that he had or that he assumed in that relationship, because he, and maybe who knows, maybe he even believed that, which is nonsense, but that he held over his wife just so that, and we know that, and as you say, in the Pakistani culture, being a mother is of the utmost importance, right? They hold that very high, to be a mother. And so to hold that over his wife, and in a very vulnerable situation where perhaps she wanted to have a child or where she really wants to be a mother, and to tell her that the only way she can get that is by performing oral sex on him, that is just so wrong.
Yeah.
It's so wrong in so many ways. So,
Yeah.
but I think you bring up so many good points, right? And the fact that women in general are often not allowed to go to school, right? And that they are tasked with staying at home and being the maternal caregiver, but also, um, that in some families, if they don't have enough money, the education of the boy will take precedence over the education of the girl. Even if the girl is very smart and shows a lot of potential, it doesn't matter. It will always be in, especially in patriarchal societies, that it will always be the son or the boy who will get the preference in terms of education.
Yeah. And, this is more true in rural in Pakistan, there's such a
Yeah.
big difference between urban versus rural. I
Yeah.
feel like most of the children in urban areas do end up going to school, even girls.
Yeah.
But then there's again like a socioeconomic difference, right? Like there is so many levels in Pakistan where, I went to school, Mama Parsi Girls High School, which is one of the best schools in Karachi. But I come from a very humble background. I think whatever money my parents had, they put it in education, and that has been such a source of empowerment for me. But then there are people who are like the people who are really lower in the socioeconomic status. Those girls don't have access to education because
Right.
their moms go and work, and
Yeah.
the older girls stay home and take care of the house and the younger children until they are at a certain age that then they go out and do the housework.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, yes, education is empowerment, but I feel like it's until like our idea of femininity undergoes some kind of revision, it's difficult to incorporate a biology education as a general education for everyone. Because, like I said, I think people want to have control over that knowledge because they associate that with promiscuity. So
Mm.
I feel like our cultural understanding of what femininity is, what it is to be a good woman, like a pious woman, has to undergo some kind of revision.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so true, right? Like, you don't see, at least I don't see, but I didn't grow up in Pakistan. I grew up here in the US, and so I don't know, and that's why I think it's so important to have your point of view, because you grew up in Pakistan. And so you know more in terms of what, kids or people are taught regarding sex education, regarding their own bodies, and what is the opportunity for women, or let's say for people that want to learn or understand more about their bodies. I guess, what is the opportunity for them is, how do they go about learning about their bodies? Is there sex education in Pakistan?
There isn't. Like I said, our biology books didn't even have diagrams of the reproductive organs, or, like there are rules against, I guess, naked bodies in textbooks. So we are not really taught that.
Wow.
And maybe later on, medical students have that information, but it's not generally available.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a
So
big gap of information. And I just didn't have any idea about my own body.
yeah, and I think, but it's so sad, because I think that so many women feel that, right? And so many, even women here in the US, don't get that education. And but the education and the information, at least here, is available, right? You have that sex education. And we could go in and start talking about sex education here in the United States. I mean, so basically what happens is that, each state receives funding, federal funding from the government, to teach students about sex education. And so, how that sex education is taught in the schools is really dependent on the district and how they fund their sex education, and really what they want to teach. So, for example, a state, like, say, that prohibits abortion will not teach as much about contraception. So you have, in those states, you have them focusing on abstinence. Okay. So even if they are teaching the children anatomy, they're not giving them all the information. They're not really giving them as much information about contraception. And so they're talking mostly about abstinence. And then what we see is that those states end up being the states that have the most amount of unplanned pregnancies, right? So clearly it's not working, what we're doing. So we really need to think about the sex education that we're teaching to our children. We need to teach them not only about their bodies, about sexually transmitted infections, unplanned pregnancies, intimate partner violence, but we also need to teach them about pleasure. We need to teach them about consent. We need to teach them about having agency over their own sexuality and what that means, and the ability to say no if they don't like something, if they don't want something, right? All all of those things are so important and really gives a more comprehensive approach to sexual education as opposed to just focusing on abstinence or focusing on, just prevention of diseases. It's really important to give everyone that knowledge so they can really advocate for themselves. And I'm a huge proponent of education about sexual agency and advocacy and consent and all of that because it's so, so important. And especially if we want to change the sex negativity that perhaps maybe we were raised with, to more of a sex positive environment, then we really need to empower children and empower them with education. We can't, oftentimes I'll see people be very hesitant, like, oh, we can't teach children X, Y, and Z. And my question is why? What's going to happen? They're going to learn about it anyways. Isn't it better that they learn from their parents? Isn't it better that they learn from, real science backed, research based, evidence based, information as opposed to like hearsay or what they see on the media or what they see in porn or whatever? Because all kids, they say that kids are exposed to porn as early as 9. So, really, it's very, very important. And it behooves us as, just individuals in society to really be that, advocate for comprehensive sexual education because it's so important.
Yeah. And sex education is for the physical and mental health of both men and women.
Uh,
And not just, gender. I'm not trying to like reinforce gender binaries, but it's like for all genders. Sex
yeah,
education is for mental and physical health
yeah,
because if we don't teach about consent, then that's going to then affect the mental health of, like from unwanted touching or the expectation that a husband doesn't have to ask for consent.
yeah.
And um, the um, this is so hard to say, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. There's a lot of issues with little girls receiving unwanted touching, right? Or I shouldn't say,
Tons of,
right?
yeah,
I shouldn't even say little girls receiving. I should say men touching little girls.
yes,
And
yeah. It's a
um,
huge problem.
it's a
Huge.
huge problem. And if we are always having this idea of shame around this topic, then we can't talk about it in a way. And this affects not just like our mental health, but also relationships, right?
Yeah,
There has to be this talking and trust in a relationship that in some ways a woman always is, physically weaker than a man. So it's not the same if a man, she has to feel safe. Her safety is priority.
yeah.
And these things are not automatic. These things have to be taught. Nothing is automatic.
Right,
So
right.
these things have people, we need education on this. And especially like when we go back to sexuality in Pakistan, there's so much of, there is like this masculinity ideal is always like, oh, that's encouraged in boys, but women need to be innocent. But then that creates more of like a power disparity in
Yeah,
relationships. And I was like telling you about this woman who thinks that her husband has all of this knowledge and the only way she can have status in the world is if she's a mother. So she has to perform whatever sexual act that he will ask for because she can be manipulated from lack of knowledge.
yeah,
So, like, all of these things affect not only girls, but also our partners, like girls and women, but also our partners. Because if boys are exposed to porn as early as middle school, they have a certain idea of female sexuality that is not real. And then that creates loneliness for them. So, like, sex education is not only for pleasure, although I'm a proponent of pleasure, but it's also like the overall well being of people. It's sex is
100%.
not something that's separate from our well-being. It's just like we teach people how to eat healthy
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
teach people to exercise because that's important for our physical and mental well-being. And sex is also a part of our health.
100%. I mean, I recently did a TED talk and I did a TEDx talk, and that was my whole premise is that sexual health is a part of a person's overall health and really is important for physicians to advocate, but really for people as well, when they have questions about their sexual health to go and speak to their providers. I think that there's so much in what you said, that I feel like we could record another podcast episode. But in terms of, women and little girls being, you know, um, I don't know if I want to say sexually assaulted, but abused, right? And molested when they're young. And then those little girls don't have the proper terminology to advocate for themselves. And they're scared because they think that it's something they did and something that, perhaps the perpetrator tells them that it's something that, they encouraged or they liked or something like that. And then they grow up and they have this mental trauma, right? About the sexual trauma about what happened to them. And so then they think that, of course, not only will they have sex negativity, but how they feel about their body and then the body shaming. And then, there's just so much about how they'll go and feel about their own bodies, right? Maybe they'll feel like they're broken, or maybe they'll feel like they're dirty because something like this happened to them and they were molested when they were young. I mean, there's there's a lot of problems in our society. So I think that what I would like to maybe say is that it's really important for perhaps, whoever's listening, the viewers and the listeners out there, to really advocate for comprehensive sexual education and to learn for themselves about sex and the anatomy. And I will tell you that, I was having the podcast people that helped me record, and his name is Alan and his wife Melissa, and they were helping me to go over all of the most downloaded episodes. And one of them was the female anatomy, right? Because people are really curious and they don't get that and they don't know. And if like what you're saying is that if those images are restricted in books, and so if people don't have access to books and they don't have access to the knowledge, then it just becomes this huge mystery and they just don't know. And then in their mind, they think like, wow, this must be really wrong what I'm looking up, right? Like, this is wrong. This is dirty. And I shouldn't know this, but I want to know this because I don't know what the hell's going on with my body, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we really need to get rid of the taboo. I think we need to get rid of the mystery and just empower people to learn
Yeah.
about themselves, learn about their bodies, learn what they
Yeah.
like, what they don't like, so that they can advocate for
And
themselves.
and it's, like it's not antithetical to being a Muslim, which is what I'm trying to emphasize, that Islam has all of this discussion and talks about sexuality, about what a woman's sexual rights and the responsibilities of the husband, and all of this information was openly shared, and the Prophet Muhammad used to talk about it with
Yeah.
with the followers. So why is there suddenly this idea of shame around sexuality? It's not appropriate and it's harmful, and it's mostly harmful to girls and women. We
Yeah.
need to know about it. We need to know what the body looks like, what the things are called, what the body parts are called. When I was growing up, the body parts were referred to as shame shame.
Oh my gosh.
It wasn't, we didn't even have like words for it.
And there's
And
so much behind that, right?
and then what is appropriate touching? What is inappropriate touching? I needed to know that because I can tell you, Sadaf, in every girl's life, there's at least one creepy man, uncle, neighbor, some family friend. There is somebody creepy in a little girl's life, and girls need to be taught what is appropriate touching, what is not appropriate touching. This is not sex education is not only for sex as pleasure, but it's the overall health and well-being of people. So there just needs to be this awareness that we can talk about it. It's not shameful. Knowledge of sex and body, sexual organs and sexual health is, there's nothing shameful. It doesn't mean that if I teach it, I'm promiscuous. If I know it, I'm promiscuous. information is needed so that we can act accordingly. And it's our culture has somehow developed this idea that knowledge of sex means you are not innocent or pure. The
Yeah.
pure girls don't know anything. You're supposed to be like completely innocent, not only of experience, but also any information about it. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's not innocent. That's not, there is like I'm very suspicious of that.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that you bring up so many things, and I think I'll definitely have to have you on again because I think we need to go over all these things that you brought up. And absolutely, I think our next episode will have to be on how do we change this, right? How do we change the narrative? How do we work for this change? Because it's so important for women and men and everyone to know about their own bodies and to be able to advocate. And you mentioned little girls and a creepy uncle, whatever, but I would say that yes, girls being molested, but also boys, little boys being
Yeah,
molested as well, right? and
yeah.
and not and not having the language to say what it is that's happening to them because of the ingrained sex negativity, but also about the shame and the embarrassment and like what would so and so say, what would the community say if you told them that this happened to you? We don't talk about it, we don't do anything about it, so whatever. I mean, like it's just there's so much of that hushing that goes on, right, in
And
the
the
culture.
silence only makes it
Yes,
worse
yes, yes.
because it allows the perpetrator to get away. They know that the
Yes,
family is going to stay quiet about this because they don't want the shame of like, what will people say? So it
yeah,
empowers the perpetrator, and we need to break all of these silences. I
yes.
have a lot of thoughts on how we can go around about changing the culture.
Yeah,
Pakistani dramas have a lot of power in changing the psychology and the narrative of people because so many people watch it and they all watch the same one. So some of that
that's
awareness always
so
comes with
true.
like arts and culture. Like
So
arts will
true.
always somehow lead the change. And then it just gets to the point where the laws will automatically change
Yeah.
because people have gone through this change within themselves. It's difficult to change the laws when people haven't gone through that evolution in their own thinking. So yeah, it really, um, I feel like there's so much work that needs to be done. And I'm so glad that you're doing this podcast in which you are making all of this information transparent and available to people who are seeking it and in a very like objective way that this is about empowerment, it's your education. We're not giving advice. We're not telling you what to do or what not to do with your life. We're just giving people information. That's empowering in itself.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it's really, really important to do that. And I see what you're saying. I mean, in terms of, next steps and what we can do. I mean, there's so much. And I think that we're going to have to keep the listeners listening and do another episode, right? Then we're going to have to come back and schedule another talk where we can talk about how we can help to improve the culture and empower more people so that they can learn about their bodies. But, I am just so grateful that you came on. And as we wrap up, I'm sure there are people that are listening and watching and wondering, like, wow, her work is so amazing. And this is what I've been thinking the whole time. I mean, I know when I read your work, I was like, wow, I really need to talk to her. I mean, I literally, from the moment that I saw that paper, I was like, oh my God, this woman is writing papers on, Pakistani feminism. And I've never, not that I've been researching that field, but I haven't seen anyone write anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have this woman on my podcast, to talk about this because this is something that I think is so important. So, how can people get in touch with you? How can, if they have any questions, reach out? I don't know if you have a social media platform. How can they reach out if they're interested in
I have a
it?
website where I post my papers. They're not all up there, but my website is like right now redirected to an academia.edu where I post some of my papers. And my website is just my name, sakinajangbar.com.
Okay.
And if people want to email me for information or if they want to collaborate on something, My email is jangbars@stjohns.edu.
That's fantastic. Well, I am so grateful that you came on and discussed this really important topic. And we know that there are a lot of issues,
Thank you
but
so much
that
for inviting me. I kind of want my research to leave the academic circles and be more available and accessible to people. I feel like podcast is one of the way we can make academic work available so that it's supposed to make a difference. It's not supposed to just stay in the academia.
Right, right. So no, but thank you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing and for the research you're putting out there. People like me really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And well, I am done here and this has been real and really intimate. And if you have any questions again about your health or your religion, make sure you follow up with the people that can help you the most. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. So thank you for listening to the podcast and make sure you leave us a review, share and like the podcast. And if you leave me a review, I'd love to shout you out on social media. So be sure that you share it with all your friends. And thanks for listening.